There is a strange moment many people experience, but rarely understand. The moment you stop chasing approval, stop explaining yourself, or quietly set a boundary, and the other person reacts with irritation, coldness, or outright hostility. You didn't insult them. You didn't escalate. You simply became emotionally detached, more independent, less available. Yet instead of respect, the atmosphere tightens. Conversations turn sharp. Small actions are misinterpreted. What once felt cooperative suddenly feels adversarial. The confusion can be disorienting, making you question whether you did something wrong when all you did was step back into your own space. This reaction is not a personal failure, nor is it proof that independence is selfish. It is a predictable psychological response rooted in loss of control psychology. When someone loses influence over another person over their emotions, attention, or compliance, it can trigger an ego threat. That threat activates insecurity, fear of irrelevance, and the anxiety of diminished status. Emotional detachment removes leverage, and for certain personalities, that removal feels like an attack. What looks like anger or criticism is often a defensive response to weakened dominance, rather than a response to your behavior itself. Underneath these reactions lie power dynamics that govern social relationships more than most people are willing to admit. Influence and dominance shape how safety, value, and identity are maintained. Through a Machiavellian psychology lens, emotional withdrawal destabilizes unspoken hierarchies by disrupting who controls outcomes and access. When control fades, the nervous system seeks to restore it, sometimes through manipulation, guilt, or aggression. This speech will explain why independence destabilizes certain personalities, how emotional withdrawal exposes insecurity that was previously hidden, and how understanding this shift allows you to remain calm, protected, and strategically composed. Instead of reacting emotionally or seeking validation, you are about to gain clarity about the forces at play, clarity that transforms confusion into awareness and replaces self-doubt with quiet control. Influence over another person fades. The reaction is rarely neutral. For many individuals, control is not simply a behavior. It is an emotional anchor. It provides predictability, reassurance, and a sense of personal stability. In dominance psychology, control often becomes fused with identity. Being the one who directs outcomes, sets the emotional tone, or determines access reinforces a belief of importance. When that role is disrupted, the internal structure that depended on it begins to fracture. Loss of influence creates psychological instability because it challenges how a person understands their position in the social hierarchy. Control dynamics operate silently in most relationships, reinforced by habits, expectations, and unspoken agreements. One person initiates, the other responds. One person withdraws affection, the other compensates. When independence or firm boundaries interrupt this rhythm, it exposes how much emotional security was derived from dominance. The sudden inability to shape another person's reactions feels less like change and more like erasure. An ego threat emerges when control no longer produces the expected outcome. Instead of compliance or reassurance, there is emotional detachment. This shift is often interpreted not as autonomy, but as rejection. The mind translates loss of dominance into loss of value. Once self-worth is tied to authority, any reduction in influence feels humiliating. Anger becomes a way to reassert presence. Criticism attempts to destabilize the other person's confidence. Guilt-tripping reframes independence as cruelty. Passive aggression serves as a covert attempt to regain leverage without openly acknowledging vulnerability. These behaviors are not expressions of strength. They are defensive maneuvers activated by insecurity. When control is the primary tool for emotional regulation, its absence leaves a vacuum. Hostility fills that space because it restores a sense of impact, even if the impact is negative. From a social hierarchy perspective, the loss of dominance threatens perceived rank. For individuals who measure safety through superiority or relevance, neutrality feels unsafe. They must either regain control or attack the source of discomfort. Machiavellian insights reveal that power often operates below conscious awareness. Many people are not intentionally manipulative, yet they rely on influence to feel secure. When emotional detachment removes access, it exposes dependency that was previously hidden. The controlled individual was not just a partner, colleague, or friend. They were a stabilizing reference point. Without that reference, the controlling individual confronts uncertainty about their own standing. Consider a professional environment where a manager is accustomed to unquestioned compliance. When an employee begins asserting boundaries, asking for clarity, or operating autonomously, the manager may respond with micromanagement or hostility. The behavior is framed as maintaining standards, but the underlying driver is loss of influence. Authority feels compromised, and the ego seeks restoration through pressure rather than adaptation. The same pattern appears in personal relationships when one partner becomes emotionally self-sufficient. What once passed as concern transforms into resentment because access no longer guarantees reassurance. In social settings, friendships can shift when one person no longer seeks approval or validation. The friend who once felt central may react with sarcasm or withdrawal, interpreting independence as abandonment. The reaction is not about closeness. It is about control dynamics changing without consent. Emotional security that relied on dominance collapses, and hostility emerges as a protest. These reactions feel personal because they are processed through identity. Loss of influence is not experienced as a situational adjustment, but as an existential threat. The nervous system responds accordingly, prioritizing defense over reflection. Recognizing this pattern reframes hostility as evidence of fragility rather than authority. The louder the reaction, the deeper the insecurity being exposed. Understanding this allows the situation to be seen clearly without absorbing blame for a disruption that merely revealed an imbalance that already existed. Emotional detachment and boundary setting are often misunderstood as passive aggression or withdrawal, yet they operate more accurately as silent power shifts. They do not announce themselves, demand attention, or seek confrontation. Instead, they change the structure of interaction. When emotional engagement is reduced, the flow of validation, reassurance, and reaction is interrupted. For individuals who rely on that flow to feel secure, the absence registers immediately. What feels calm and self-contained to one person feels destabilizing to another. Many control-based relationships are sustained not through overt authority, but through predictable emotional access. Responses arrive on time. Explanations are given freely. Reassurance is available on demand. Emotional detachment alters this rhythm without explanation. Neurologically, the brain anticipates reward and regulation through familiar patterns. When those patterns are disrupted, stress responses activate. Cortisol rises, uncertainty increases, and the mind seeks to restore equilibrium. This is why influence loss produces discomfort that feels urgent and personal rather than abstract. Boundaries intensify this effect because they clarify limits without negotiation. A calm refusal, reduced responsiveness, or emotional neutrality communicates autonomy without inviting debate. There is no argument to win, no behavior to correct, no opening for persuasion. The absence of emotional charge removes leverage. For those accustomed to managing outcomes through reaction, this creates a sense of powerlessness. The discomfort is not caused by the boundary itself, but by the realization that access is no longer guaranteed. Once detachment is perceived, attempts to restore control often follow predictable patterns. Manipulation reframes the boundary as cruelty or selfishness. Escalation introduces urgency through anger or accusation. Emotional provocation seeks to draw out a reaction that can be used to re-establish influence. These strategies reveal how much regulation depended on external compliance. When calm disengagement persists, these efforts intensify because confrontation would at least confirm relevance. Silence and neutrality offer no such confirmation. This is why emotional detachment frequently triggers stronger reactions than open conflict. Confrontation maintains engagement. It keeps both parties emotionally invested in the outcome. Detachment, by contrast, signals independence without hostility. It communicates that the relationship is no longer the primary source of emotional stability. In control-based relationships, this shift feels threatening because it exposes dependency that was previously disguised as care or leadership. Examples of this dynamic appear across personal and professional contexts. A colleague who stops over-explaining decisions may suddenly be labeled uncooperative. A family member who calmly declines involvement may be accused of being distant or ungrateful. A partner who maintains emotional neutrality during conflict may provoke heightened drama. In each case, the behavior being challenged is not disrespect, but the loss of influence. The reaction reveals entitlement to access rather than mutual respect. Emotional independence functions as a non-verbal assertion of autonomy. It reorganizes power dynamics by removing the assumption that emotions are shared property. Reduced responsiveness communicates that engagement is a choice, not an obligation. Calm refusal demonstrates that boundaries are not punishments, but structures. Emotional neutrality shows that regulation comes from within rather than through external validation. When these shifts occur, insecurity often surfaces rapidly. Control-seeking behavior becomes more visible because it no longer works invisibly. Attempts to provoke, guilt, or dominate expose reliance on influence rather than connection. Recognizing this allows emotional detachment to be understood not as withdrawal, but as clarity. It clarifies where respect ends and control begins. In doing so, it transforms relationships by revealing which dynamics were built on autonomy and which were sustained through influence alone. Loss of dominance has a revealing effect. When influence over others no longer functions as expected, internal weaknesses that were previously concealed by authority begin to surface. Power often acts as a mask, allowing insecurity to remain hidden behind confidence, decisiveness, or moral certainty. Once that power erodes, the traits it was compensating for become visible. Resentment replaces composure. Fear of irrelevance emerges where assurance once existed. The shift is not subtle because the stabilizing mechanism has been removed. Individuals who rely on dominance for emotional regulation experience its loss as exposure. Without control, there is nothing to buffer self-doubt or soothe uncertainty. The mind searches for ways to reassert relevance, often by intensifying behavior rather than reflecting on it. Hostility increases not because the situation worsened, but because the internal threat has grown. This is why reactions escalate after influence fades rather than calming down. The loss itself activates the weakest psychological points. Moralizing becomes a common tactic during dominance loss. By framing the other person as wrong, disloyal, or unethical, the individual attempts to reclaim superiority. Character attacks serve a similar function. They shift attention away from diminished authority and redirect it toward perceived flaws in the other. These strategies are not about truth or accountability. They are about restoring a hierarchy where one position feels elevated. The more fragile the ego, the more extreme the moral framing tends to become. Manipulation psychology explains why certain behaviors cluster together during this phase. Gaslighting attempts to destabilize perception, making the other person doubt their memory or judgment. Blame shifting reframes autonomy as harm, turning independence into offense. Emotional pressure leverages guilt, fear, or obligation to force re-engagement. Victim framing casts the loss of dominance as mistreatment, positioning control as something that was deserved. Each tactic reveals dependency because it relies on the other person's participation to succeed. From a Machiavellian psychology perspective, this phase represents involuntary self-exposure. Strategies that once worked quietly now appear obvious, because the underlying power structure has changed. Manipulation becomes more transparent when leverage is gone. Attempts to regain control signal desperation rather than authority. The individual's need for dominance becomes visible precisely because it is no longer being met. What was once implicit now has to be enforced, and enforcement reveals weakness. These patterns appear in professional environments when leaders lose informal authority. Increased micromanagement, public criticism, or sudden rule enforcement often follow. In personal relationships, accusations intensify when emotional leverage disappears. In social groups, exclusion or gossip may emerge as attempts to regain relevance. Across contexts, the behaviors share the same origin: fear of losing status and identity. Dominance loss is interpreted as personal diminishment, not as relational evolution. Observing these reactions without engagement changes the dynamic further. When manipulation fails to provoke response, its effectiveness collapses. Calm observation denies reinforcement. It removes the emotional fuel that control-seeking behavior requires. This does not mean passivity. It means strategic clarity. By not reacting, one allows the behavior to fully reveal itself without interference. The contrast between composure and escalation highlights where stability truly resides. Power reversal occurs not through confrontation, but through visibility. As insecurity exposure increases, credibility decreases. The individual attempting to dominate becomes defined by their tactics rather than their position. Recognizing this process allows one to remain grounded and protected. Instead of internalizing accusations or responding defensively, the situation can be understood as a predictable response to dominance loss. Clarity replaces confusion, and leverage is maintained through understanding rather than force. Recognizing hostility as a psychological reaction to lost control changes how it is experienced internally. What once felt confusing or personal becomes intelligible. Awareness of power dynamics creates distance between behavior and meaning, allowing the nervous system to remain regulated. Instead of absorbing anger or criticism as evidence of wrongdoing, it can be seen as a signal of destabilization in the other person. This shift alone reduces emotional reactivity because clarity replaces interpretation. When the underlying mechanism is understood, composure becomes a natural response rather than an effortful one. Emotional control is not suppression. It is alignment with reality. Knowing that hostility often arises from diminished influence prevents the mind from searching for hidden offenses or imagined failures. Confusion dissolves because the behavior fits a pattern. Power awareness allows reactions to be observed rather than mirrored, preserving psychological protection in situations designed to provoke. Perception control plays a critical role in this dynamic. Composure under pressure communicates authority without assertion. It signals self-possession, emotional sovereignty, and internal stability. In social and professional hierarchies, those who remain calm during escalation are perceived as higher status because they are not governed by the emotional environment. The absence of visible agitation suggests confidence in one's position. This perception shift often intensifies discomfort in those seeking control, as their attempts fail to produce the desired effect. Refusing to react emotionally interrupts the escalation cycle. Anger feeds on engagement. Criticism seeks defense. Manipulation depends on response. When these inputs are denied, the behavior loses momentum. Calm presence forces others to confront their own instability because there is no external target to absorb it. This is why strategic composure often provokes silence, withdrawal, or self-correction. The interaction cannot proceed without mutual participation. Strategic composure should not be confused with passivity. It is an active stance grounded in observation and choice. By maintaining emotional distance, one gains time and perspective. This allows decisions to be made from clarity rather than pressure. Boundaries remain intact because they are not negotiated in the heat of reaction. Emotional sovereignty ensures that regulation comes from within, not from managing another person's state. Maintaining this posture also protects against long-term psychological erosion. Internalizing hostility can lead to self-doubt, hypervigilance, and emotional exhaustion. Power awareness acts as a buffer, filtering external behavior through understanding rather than assumption. Psychological protection is strengthened when one recognizes that not all negative reactions require correction or response. Many are expressions of unresolved insecurity triggered by influence loss. As composure stabilizes, the balance of power subtly shifts. The individual who remains grounded becomes the reference point. Calmness establishes credibility because it demonstrates control over the only domain that truly matters: oneself. Emotional control does not seek dominance, yet it often results in it because it cannot be taken away. Others may attempt to provoke, but without access to reaction, their efforts lose relevance. Much of the hostility encountered in moments of independence is not personal. It is the friction created when influence diminishes and old dynamics collapse. Understanding this allows one to stand firm without defensiveness and remain open without vulnerability. Strategic composure, clear boundaries, and observational distance preserve both power and protection, creating a position of quiet authority that does not need to be declared to be felt.